Operating a business is a high-stakes coordination of resources and capital, managing a constant blur of inventory, payroll, and equipment to maintain basic operations. Maria left a $70,000 annual salary as an executive chef to launch her own restaurant, QuickBite. In its inaugural year, QuickBite generated $300,000 in total revenue. To determine her profit, we first subtract explicit costs, the direct cash outlays for rent, ingredients, staff wages, and marketing. Maria's explicit costs totaled $250,000. Subtracting these from her revenue results in $50,000 of accounting profit. Accounting profit measures historical cash flows, but provides an incomplete picture of a firm's health by omitting the secondary sacrifices required to maintain the business. Evaluating the true viability of QuickBite requires shifting from an accounting perspective to an economic one. Economists prioritize implicit costs, inputs that do not require a cash outlay. The most significant of these is the opportunity cost of the owner's next best alternative. For Maria, that cost was the $70,000 in salary she forfeited by leaving her previous job. Adding this implicit cost reveals an economic profit of negative $20,000. This follows the central rule of economic analysis. Total opportunity cost is the sum of explicit and implicit costs. Accountants track the explicit cash flows on the right, while economists factor in those hidden sacrifices on the left to determine if a firm should actually remain in operation. Determining a firm's long-term viability requires measuring the total economic sacrifice, looking past the cash register to see the physical limits of production. To understand how these costs originate, we must look at a physical manufacturing environment, specifically Caroline's cookie factory. Most businesses operate with fixed inputs in the short term. Caroline cannot immediately expand the square footage of her facility or increase the number of industrial ovens. To increase production today, she must rely on variable inputs, such as the number of workers hired for a shift. This relationship between the quantity of inputs used and the total cookies produced is defined as the production function. Adding the first, second, and third workers causes a sharp increase in output as they specialize and divide the labor. However, as the fourth, fifth, and sixth workers are added, total output increases at a declining rate. This is diminishing marginal product. As more variable inputs are added to a fixed workspace, the facility becomes crowded, causing individual efficiency to drop. Because physical space is finite, a workforce cannot scale indefinitely within a fixed factory without production efficiency eventually collapsing. Panel A of this dia shows the production function in action. The curve arches upward initially, but flattens as the factory reaches 6 workers. This plateau represents the factory's physical capacity. At this point, the constraints of the building are choking off additional output. When every new worker produces fewer cookies than the last, the cost of producing each additional unit increases. Panel B reveals the financial consequence. As physical production capacity reaches its limit, the total cost curve steepens. While the curve starts relatively flat, it becomes aggressively vertical as the volume of production rises. Attempting to force higher output from an exhausted fixed system triggers an exponential surge in production costs. In any market, a business's pricing strategy is ultimately defined by 2 conflicting forces pulling in opposite directions. To find the balance, we use average total cost, or ATC. This is the total operating cost divided by the quantity of output, representing the cost of a typical unit. The first force is economies of scale. As volume increases, heavy fixed costs are divided over more units, pulling the average cost down. But as volume approaches the facility's physical limit, diminishing returns take over. Skyrocketing variable costs for labor and logistics pull the average back up, creating a distinct U-shaped average total cost curve. Every physical product is subject to this U-shape's gravitational pull, a constant tension between the benefits of scale and the penalty of physical limits. The absolute lowest point of this U-curve marks the center of that tension. This is the minimum efficient scale, or MES. At this specific quantity, the firm is producing at its lowest possible competitive price. Maria's negative economic profit at QuickBite reflects a failure of scale. She was trapped on the high, inefficient sides of her cost curve, regardless of the quality of her product. Survival requires businesses to optimize their output to sit exactly at the MES, maximizing production up to the point where diminishing returns begin to dominate. Achieving this perfect state of balance requires a highly precise orchestration of both fixed assets and variable labor on the factory floor. While accountants document historical explicit cash flows, economists analyze the U-curve, identifying the specific scale where variable labor and fixed assets maximize output.